Coming up, I've heard some whoppers in my time. Some of the great stories of how songs and artists came to be. This one's got to be near the top 10. Coming up next, an insane 80s rock story about everything but the kitchen sink. It's a story of a song that today's sensational rock singer felt would be a huge hit when his band put it out in '82. Instead, it became a spark that started a chain of events that nearly killed his career and his band and really him. The song failed, but he went back to the drawing board and he was on the cusp of a major breakthrough record when he lost his voice entirely and he had to have voice surgery. Doctors said he would never sing again, but he would beat the odds and get his voice in shape. He'd get it back. But then at this point, he was destitute. He had to sing ad jingles just to make rent. He was $3 million in debt to the label, and it got so bad, the label wouldn't give him cash to make a music video to promote the song to get out of debt. Yet somehow he overcame. He dug up his failed 1982 recording of the song he knew was a hit, and he did it again 5 years later. In fact, he had to record it 3 times with 3 different bands because he fired his entire group before the album came out. But the song and its music video would dominate the late 80s with one of the hottest video vixens in history. If you're a Gen Xer, you know what I'm talking about. The story's coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you missed the days at classic MTV and VH1, this is your place. Nostalgia all the time. Subscribe to our channel right now. Click the bell so you can be a permanent part of our music nostalgia daily. When one is trying to get the true account of the provenance of anything, especially a piece of art that involved the input of more than one person, an unusual phenomenon often takes place called the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect, that refers to when a large number of people share a false memory, originally attributed to the existence of multiple universes. The late film producer Robert Evans once quipped, "There are 3 sides to every story. My side, your side, and of course the truth." When telling the story of Whitesnake's retrospective greatest hit, Here I Go Again, the Mandela effect is in full force. As lead singer and co-founder David Coverdale likes to say, everyone has a Here I Go Again story. Coverdale was hired as the lead singer for Deep Purple to replace the disenchanted Ian Gillan in 1973. He left Deep Purple in '76 and he co-founded Whitesnake. This happened in '78. One of the co-founders of Whitesnake was veteran blues guitarist Bernie Marsden. While working on material for the album Saints and Sinners, Marsden presented a rough draft of a song that he was noodling on called Here I Go Again. According to Marsden, he had the Here I Go Again line, along with some verses that, needed some work. Bernie added that Coverdale kept the title, and he finished the lyrics for the song. David Coverdale's story, true to form, is quite different from Bernie Marsden's. Over countless interviews on the subject of the inception of Here I Go Again, David Coverdale has maintained that he wrote the song in 1981 about the breakup of his marriage to his first wife, Julie Burkowski. David recalls being on holiday with Julie and their young daughter in southern Portugal, when issues between the couple led them to sleeping in separate rooms. It was during that tense experience that he began to write this song, Here I Go Again. The original version of Here I Go Again was a focal track for the Saints and Sinners LP in '82 as the lead single from that record. Now, the album broke the top 10 in the band's native UK, but the single hit the wall, went to number 34, and there was no fanfare to speak of in America. Coverdale called Saints and Sinners his contractual obligation album. He was totally dissatisfied with the musicianship on that particular record. Now, 2 years later, in 1984, Whitesnake released their 6th studio LP, Slide It In, and the band began to get some traction in the US, particularly with the single Slow and Easy. That went to number 17 on the mainstream rock chart. Seemed as if Whitesnake was poised for breakthrough success on their very next album. In the US, Whitesnake was signed to Geffen Records in '83 by legendary A&R executive John Kalodner. Now remember, we just talked about Kalodner a bit ago. He was one of the architects behind Aerosmith's big comeback in the late 80s and one of the great record men of his time for sure. It was Kalodner's responsibility to see that Whitesnake deliver their next album in 1985. Kalodner's involvement with Whitesnake was complete. The choice of songs to record, the selection of the studio and producers, the art for the album cover, everything. A new Whitesnake album was a huge part of the label's annual revenue projections for 85 and 86. However, there was deep trouble on the horizon that threatened to derail the entire project. Even though Whitesnake had 6 studio albums under their belt and a pretty solid tour base, the band was actually destitute. Coverdale himself was millions of dollars in debt, $3 million to be exact. To make matters worse, Coverdale was afflicted with a vicious sinus infection that required him to receive nasal surgery in 1985. He was unable to use his vocal instrument for nearly 9 months. Coverdale honestly believed that his singing days were over, and for a while it was touch and go. Seemed that the breakthrough record might never see the light of day, but luckily David's throat finally healed, and he got his voice back, slowly but surely, and he was able to finish the vocals for the record in August of '86. And when David was finished recording, he actually sacked his entire band, including John Sykes, who co-authored 2 of the forthcoming album's biggest singles, Still of the Night and Is This Love? I mean, the contempt between Sykes and Coverdale has been so intense that the two have not spoken since Sykes was unceremoniously dismissed. Before the release of the '87 LP Whitesnake, they had only one band member left, David Coverdale. The bills related to the making of the album, they were mounting, and there was no revenue coming in for the band to offset these charges. Believe it or not, like I said, Coverdale, $3 million in debt, and he was getting poorer by the minute. I mean, conditions got so dire that Coverdale was an uninsured motorist, unable to pay his premiums, and he couldn't check out of the Mondrian Hotel in West Hollywood, where he was living, because he couldn't pay the bill. Coverdale resorted to singing cheesy jingles for the New York Seltzer Company to bring in just a little bit of cash. I'm sure it's something that he was not happy about being stuck with. Now, the executives at Geffen, including Kalodner and David Geffen himself, were tired of the delays and the demands of David Coverdale, and they refused to pay for the video for the first single, Still of the Night. Their enthusiasm and their funding, it was circling the drain. The Whitesnake album that was on the release docket for '85 was more than 2 years overdue. The status of the name Whitesnake with Geffen was tenuous at best. Even Kalodner was in fear of losing his job. It was the proverbial make or break time for Whitesnake and for David Coverdale. And everyone associated with the Whitesnake album really across the board. Desperate to get money to produce the video for Still of the Night, David Coverdale actually met with an up-and-coming video director, Marty Callner, with his hat in hand. Callner, whose career in music videos began with the iconic clip for We're Not Gonna Take It by Twisted Sister. He really liked Coverdale, and he liked the music. He was aware that Geffen was not going to pay for anything other than a bare-bones production. So he decided to front David Coverdale the money and pay for the creation of the entire video for Still of the Night. It was an incredible break, to say the least, proving to be a miraculous game changer for David Coverdale and Whitesnake. The finished video for Still of the Night was presented to millions of viewers as the hot clip of the week at MTV, and Whitesnake's fortunes immediately soared. Based on the subsequent surge in record sales, Geffen approved a budget for 2 additional music videos, for the ballad Is This Love and for Here I Go Again. Still of the Night was a hit at mainstream rock. It climbed to number 18. And then came the second and third incarnation of the Coverdale Marsden composition, Here I Go Again. Listen to this. So amazingly, David Coverdale did not want Here I Go Again on the '87 album. It's mostly because it was an old song and he felt it had its day. David grumbled that putting Here I Go Again on the new record would be a prostitution of his older work. But Kalodner very brilliantly insisted. He knew it would be a hit. He made the song's inclusion a specific deal point for Geffen's contract with Whitesnake, and Coverdale didn't have much of a choice here. Actually, Kolodner's plan was to re-record Here I Go Again and, transform the track into a hit for the American market. The overhaul of the song from the original 82 recording swapped the organ excerpt, played by John Lord in the intro, in favor of a modern synthesizer intro performed by Don Airey. One of the most noticeable alterations from the two versions was, of course, the lyric change from "Like a hobo I was born to walk alone" to the revised "Like a drifter I was born to walk alone."
Like a hobo, I was born to walk alone. Like a drifter, I was born to walk alone.
The lineup of musicians that played on the second version of Here I Go Again included some really heavy hitters. Of course, the magnificent Coverdale on lead vocals. There was Neil Murray on bass, John Sykes rhythm guitar and backing vocals. Adrian Vandenberg performed the song's tasty guitar solo. There was also former Journey drummer Ainsley Dunbar on drums. Don Airey, like I said, played the synthesizer. And then Bill Cuomo provided additional keyboard parts. The album, that was produced by Mike Stone, who also produced Journey, and the great Keith Olsen, Fleetwood Mac, and a few others who he'd produced. They had both achieved elite status in the record business. At the insistence of Kolodner, there was yet a third version of Here I Go Again that was billed as the 87 radio mix. This one was a tighter, brighter mix to procure crossover top 40 airplay. Now remember, Coverdale fired everybody after the second recording of Here I Go Again, so they had to bring in a group of all new players for yet another version. The 87 radio mix featured Denny Carmassi on drums and Dan Huff on guitar, amongst others. The synthesizer intro was removed entirely, with Coverdale's lead vocal transitioning much faster into the first verse. If you think about it and really remember, MTV was basically the Whitesnake video channel in 87 and 88. The videos for the first three singles from the Whitesnake 87 album, they were all in power rotation on this network, including Is This Love, which of course was a stone cold smash. It went to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, and it also went to number 13 on the mainstream rock chart. Now, the treatment for the trio of videos had an iconic common thread: the stunning sex symbol, the late Tawny Kitaen. Tawny was the eye catcher for all three Whitesnake music videos, but her cartwheel gymnastics on the hoods of two Jaguars in the clip for Here I Go Again, it was truly one of the most memorable spectacles of the MTV heyday. It was one of the most iconic moments of the entire year. The gut instincts of John Kolodner did not fail him. The revamp of Here I Go Again was a towering #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100, which was really something. I mean, you think about it, Whitesnake passed up the megastars of the era, including Michael Jackson and Prince and Whitney Houston. It was a huge victory for hard rock and for metal. Here I Go Again has established a legacy as an anthemic classic rock standard with a dual meaning that is a word of the song, timeless emotional resonance. The track is a rousing soundtrack of self-reflection, beginning with the contemplative keyboard intro flowing under David Coverdale's heartfelt, soul-searching, "I don't know where I'm going, but I sure know where I've been."
But I sure know where I've been.
Hanging on the promises and songs of yesterday. And I made up my mind, I ain't wasting no more time. So here I go again.
I ain't wasting no more time. Here I go again.
It's the kind of jukebox poetry that has lifted my spirit, and I'm sure yours, too many times to mention. The chorus of Here I Go Again marshals energy to turn away from the past and rush forward with what lies ahead in your life's journey with a conquering David Coverdale proclamation. Here I go again on my own, going down the only road I've ever known.
And here I go again on my own.
Like a drifter, I was born to walk alone, but I made up my mind, I ain't wasting no more time. 2006, VH1 named Here I Go Again as the 17th greatest rock song of the 80s. It's a song that's been a pick-me-up, like I said, a motivator for me whenever I've felt like throwing in the proverbial towel. So here's a story that I remember well. When I was in the 6th grade, there were 2 things that I collected and was obsessed with: music and comic books. Comic books, I had about 500 of them. It's kind of like the comic book nerd of the town. There was a girl that I was in love with since the 5th grade. She was popular, and at the time I was kind of a zero. I, of course, made her mixtapes and sent over notes that would say, "Will you go with me?" with, the yes, no, or maybe check boxes. You know what I'm talking about. You grew up in the 80s, for those of you who did. For a year, I was chasing this girl and being rejected right and left. Finally, the day before Valentine's Day, 1988, her friend came over and told me that this girl would go with me if I just throw away all my comic books. In essence, she was trying to make me shed the comic book geek status that I had. Well, I'll tell you, I was only 11 or 12. I didn't know who I was. I still cared what people thought of me. I wouldn't learn the lessons that, Robert Smith of The Cure and Morrissey of the Smiths would teach me in songs for another year or so. I was blinded by my schoolboy crush for this girl, so I committed to throwing out every single one of my comic books. That day I went home, and along with a few friends, I packed up all my comic books and I hauled them to the nearby dump. That's what we called it. It was a sad day, but alas, I was about to win the heart of my 6th grade crush. Since the next day was Valentine's Day, I spent most of my allowance on a stuffed bear holding a rose with some balloons. You know what they used to do back in the day. The next day, I walked up to her. I remember she was wearing Guess jeans and a pink Esprit shirt, a totally rad swatch, and huge neon hoop earrings. She kind of looked like Mercedes from that Corey Feldman, Corey Haim 80s movie License to Drive. You remember that?
I don't need the BMW anymore.
Les!
Told her my brave sacrifice of getting rid of hundreds of comic books, including the entire run of Gru the Wanderer, every single Mad magazine since the 70s, and Peter Porker, the Spectacular Spider-Ham. So I handed her my gift, this teddy bear, and we walked down the hall holding hands. I went from geek to chic. For the next few periods, I was on top of the world. I was on cloud 9. I had the girl of my dreams. Anyway, the last class of the day, I actually sat by my crush. And halfway through that class, she passed me a note. I was so excited. I opened it with a cool bravado. So it said, "Adam, thanks for the V-Day gift. You're such a nice guy. Let's just be friends. P.S. You're dumped." Dumped. I read it again to make sure that my eyes hadn't deceived me. Dumped on Valentine's Day after throwing away my prized comic book collection? I was devastated. Easy come, easier go. From that point forward, through the end of school, that school day, I was the laughing stock. I walked down the halls and people were pointing and laughing at me because everybody knew that I'd thrown away my comic book collection, 500 comic books, only to get kicked to the curb by this girl. She'd really only agreed to go out with me, or to go with me, to get a Valentine's gift. I mean, that was obvious. Forget about humiliating me. As I rode the bus home in utter turmoil and heartbreak, as only a 6th grader can feel, I found my only relief, the only medicine that could get me through this pain, my Walkman. I searched my tapes for the perfect song to drown away my sorrows. Just then Whitesnake's self-titled cassette fell out on the ground. I hurriedly grabbed it. I snapped it into my player, hoping to hear "Is This Love?" To get me through this. Instead, I heard "Here I Go Again." Must have put it on the wrong side.
Here I go again on my own.
As this song blasted into my ears, instead of wallowing in my self-pity, David Coverdale's words of wisdom washed over me like a beacon of defiance and strength, motivation.
I don't know where I'm going.
I was a drifter, born to walk alone. And I wasn't going to waste any time feeling sorry for myself. I was going to pick myself up again and walk down that lonely street of dreams, hanging on to the promises and songs of yesterday.
Hanging on the promises and songs of yesterday.
And you know what? I'm still doing it. I mean, seriously, this empowering 80s song by Whitesnake continues to be that beacon of strength for so many of us.
And here I go again on my own.
And you know what I did? That day, I took the last of my allowance. I had a little bit left. I went down to the store and I restarted my comic book collection all over again. I got the latest issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. I think I also picked up David Lee Roth's album Skyscraper. Thanks to David Coverdale, I was going to be just fine. Man, they don't make them like they used to.
Like a drifter, I was born to walk alone.
Hey, leave us a comment on this incredible song. Tell me about an experience that you had where a song gave you a huge lift when you were down. I'd love to hear your stories. Tell me your memories of Whitesnake's self-titled album, of this song. If you like our content, we do invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our daily community. We talk about songs. It's all about keeping the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.